Welcome back from the international break. Today we're going to take a look at 4 key differentials to help you rise up the ranks ahead of game week 9. So first up, we've got Cole Palmer, and his move from Man City to Chelsea over the summer was met with probably a bit of surprise, and I think it was more to do with the fact that he wasn't seeing those minutes opportunities in the first team to actually break into such a good side. Whereas with Chelsea, even though they're still a very good side, there seem to be more opportunities for him to break into that first team in the near future. Well, that seems to have happened in recent game weeks, and over the last couple of game weeks in particular, he started to produce not only the goals and the assists, but also the underlying data that, to be honest, any player, especially in midfield, should be really proud of. 0.46 XG per 90 so far is incredible, and it's fair to say that a large chunk of that will be down to the fact that he took the penalty in game week 8, but it's worth noting that he's on penalties at 4.9 million. If he continues to start matches as a midfielder on penalties, that is incredible value for money at 4.9. And the only thing really putting me off a player like Cole Palmer at the moment would be looking at the 5 fixtures facing him at the moment. So going into game week 9, Arsenal at home isn't ideal. However, I would suggest game week 10 against Brentford at home is a pretty good fixture at the moment. It still looks middling on the ticker, but I think if we're balancing it on how Brentford have been performing so far this season, it's certainly not a fixture I'd be particularly scared of. Then moving across into game week 11 and beyond, Tottenham, Man City and Newcastle is admittedly fairly tough. So that's probably 4 of the next 5 aren't ideal for a midfielder like Cole Palmer at 4.9 million for Chelsea. I don't think it's a player that you want to be starting necessarily every single week. However, at 4.9 million, he's a player that you probably don't need to start every week. If you're playing either a 3-4-3 or a 4-4-2, rather than having a 5 starting midfielder formation every single week, then a player at 4.9 million can easily sit on your bench most weeks and come in when the fixtures suit. And if you're on a wild card around about now, or you've got that 5th midfielder slot that you really want to save some money on so you can make upgrades elsewhere, i.e. get across to a Mo Salah, for instance, then Cole Palmer could be absolutely perfect at under 5 million. There aren't many cheaper midfielders out there, and there are even less cheap midfielders that are actually starting games at the moment. And if you can't afford the likes of a Neto or an Anthony Gordon at 5.6, 5.7, then Cole Palmer could be the solution here. The underlying data is very good. He's been playing really well as well. So Chelsea, I don't think will have many reasons to start benching him anytime soon. And you could be locking into a penalty taker for the fixtures to come, maybe not so great. But after that, when the fixtures turn good, you've already got someone at 4.9 million on penalties. And he's an incredible differential at the moment at under 1% ownership. So getting ahead of the curve there, if people start flocking to him, the price rise could be massive and you could bank a lot of value on a player like Cole Palmer for the weeks ahead. A second incredible differential I wanted to mention today is Lyle Foster, who is only just over 1% owned at the moment, which is pretty remarkable for a starting striker at such good value. At just 5 million, he's one of the budget picks up front that are actually starting games at the moment. The only other option that's even less than him, who is starting games at the moment, is Cameron Archer, and Archer just simply isn't getting returns at the moment. Now, Burnley are a team that a lot of people won't want to own many assets in, but it's fair to say that Burnley are at least scoring a few goals, whereas the likes of Sheffield United just simply aren't at the moment. So for an extra 0.5 million, is it wise to be looking at someone like Lyle Foster, who's getting good minutes, who's getting goals, and hasn't got the worst underlying data either, in a team that is scoring more goals than the likes of Sheffield United with Cameron Archer? And when you look at the fixtures to come, it actually might be a pretty good time to start considering him as a budget enabler. When you've got Brentford away from home, as I discussed with Cole Palmer, Brentford isn't really a fixture I'd be particularly worried about at the moment, followed by Bournemouth away, Crystal Palace at home, and then, okay, the fixtures do get a little bit worse after that. Even though West Ham in game week 13 is seen as a green fixture on the ticker, I'd probably argue it's more middling than good at the moment. So for the next 3, I'd say he's a pretty good player to be looking at. Again, it's differential. He's a player that if you're playing with a 3-5-2 formation, then he could be your third striker very easily. Or if you're willing to take that punt, he could even be a second striker option. I think the only thing that would put me off something like that is because there are quite a few good second strikers out there, like Alvarez, like Watkins, like Darwin, who you probably don't want to downgrade to Lyle Foster for. So maybe a third striker option, so you've got that 8th attacker that you can start rotating in. Or if you get an injury, if someone gets benched, he's a really good player to be coming off the bench with decent underlying data. And already he's gotten 3 goals and 2 assists in the league. So that's 5 returns in just 8 game weeks. Now, it's actually even better than that for Lyle Foster because he missed 2 games because of his red card. So he's actually only played 6 matches so far, getting 5 returns in those matches. So that's really decent as a return for such a differential striker. At 5 million, he could be a really good enabler to unlock money elsewhere, like I mentioned with Cole Palmer, to help you move to someone like Mo Salah or to the likes of a Heung-min Son or a Bukayo Saka in a couple of weeks as well. Lyle Foster could really unlock those sort of options in your team, whereas a lot of wildcarders at the moment are struggling to get to, for example, a Kieran Trippier in defence because they need that 2 million elsewhere. Lyle Foster could actually help enable you to get to someone like Kieran Trippier and maybe make that downgrade up front for a player that's actually getting quite a lot of returns at the moment. He is differential for a reason. I'm not expecting everyone to love this as an option, but he's one to definitely keep an eye on for the game weeks ahead. The third player I want to talk about today is probably someone that is much more familiar with our starting lineups in FPL. Gabriel Martinelli is 4.1% owned at the moment, but the main reason behind that is because he's been coming back from that injury. Coming back off the bench against Man City was a bit of a shock to all of us. I don't think many of us expected him to be back quite so soon. But what it does mean is that when you look at the fixtures ahead, at 7.7 million, he could be a really good differential to target ahead of some pretty good fixtures. Chelsea away from home, I don't think I could even argue to you that that's a good fixture. Arsenal will be very up for it. I do expect Arsenal to probably just about get the better of Chelsea, but Chelsea's defensive numbers are still very, very good at the moment, so it might not be the ideal time to look at him. But game week 10 onwards, especially game week 10 in particular, wildcarders are going to be very interested in Gabriel Martinelli for that Sheffield United fixture. And then the fixtures after that, 3 of the next 4, I would say are really good. Sheffield United, Newcastle, not so great away from home especially, but then Burnley at home followed by Brentford away is a great set of fixtures. And who knows, maybe Bukayo Saka's still feeling generous and wants to get Martinelli back on the board with another goal. Maybe he's due a penalty donation or 2, I don't know. But what is for certain is he's 1 million or near enough 1 million cheaper than the likes of Bukayo Saka, who a lot of us will be trying to flock to ahead of that Sheffield United fixture. If you're struggling to get to him, Gabriel Martinelli is that sort of player that is very explosive. We know from last season that he's got a lot of goals in his locker, and the underlying data so far is probably the lowest we're going to see it all season. I'd suggest that that is going to climb based off what we know from Arsenal and what we know about Gabriel Martinelli as well. I'd expect those numbers to be much, much more positive in the next few game weeks, and now might be a good time to hop on him whilst he's differential, whilst he's reduced in price a little bit. I expect him to increase in ownership and price and returns in the next few game weeks. So Gabriel Martinelli over the likes of a Bukayo Saka, if you want to save around about 1 million and spend that elsewhere, could be a really interesting differential option at the moment. And with Bukayo Saka giving away penalties, is Gabriel Martinelli that much of a worse option? Is he 1 million less value than Bukayo Saka? I'm not so sure. He could be an option for game week 10 especially, so it's one to keep an eye on for the weeks ahead. So a lot has been said about that 5.5 to 6 million price bracket in midfield at the moment. There are a lot of good options out there, but none of them have got the data that Abdoulaye Doucouré has got so far this season, and that is somewhat of a surprise. The likes of Pedro Neto and Anthony Gordon, both very popular picks. I've got Gordon in my side in particular as well, and I'm really excited about owning him. But both of their statistics so far are being overshadowed quite considerably by the likes of Decore, who's getting 0.47 XG per 90 so far. And it's worth noting as well, this might just be a bit of a blip in the system to start the season, but Everton are getting a lot of XG so far. They're actually, in some metrics, in some databases, beating Man City for underlying XG so far this season, which is quite incredible, especially when you look at historically Everton's performances and the fact that Dyche is probably the last person in the world I'd actually expect to be monitoring those underlying data points. He's now coming out in press conferences and talking about the XG and relying on it as a measure of how well Everton are performing so far. Now, a beneficiary of that sort of approach could be Decore at just 1% owned and at 5.5 million. The data is more of an 8 million asset at the moment, and he is, even though he's historically a centre midfielder, he's getting into the box quite late. He's almost playing like Lampard would have at Chelsea. Okay, there's no real comparison there, but in the style of play, he's arriving almost as that second striker late in the box, making those runs, and the creative assets at Everton at the moment are somewhat also going under the radar. They've got the likes of Harrison, they've got the likes of McNeil, and they're starting to create quite a few chances. They're getting good at those cutbacks to Decore in the box as well. And he's starting to benefit from those. 3 goals so far for a centre midfielder is pretty decent. And he's actually been arguably unlucky not to get more so far. I think the one thing that we've got to be careful of is looking at the fixtures ahead. Everton probably don't have the best fixtures, especially when you compare them to the likes of Newcastle or Wolves. You've got Pedro Neto, you've got Hwang, you've got Gordon as well, all at the same sort of price point with some pretty decent fixtures. But when you really take them apart and look at each individual fixture, I wouldn't say it's so bad. Liverpool away from home, yes, Anfield is a tough place for Everton to go to, but it is the Merseyside derby. They're going to try that smash and grab. They're going to try and pick them apart if they can on the break, and Decore could benefit from that. West Ham away from home, I would say, isn't the best fixture, but then Brighton are leaking goals in game week 11. Crystal Palace, not a bad fixture. And then Man United at home, I also wouldn't say is a terrible fixture from an attacking point of view at the moment. So Decore, again, it's a differential for a reason. I wouldn't expect a lot of people to be jumping on him ahead of those fixtures. But if you're really relying on the data and you back Everton to continue to make chances for Decore, at 1% owned, he is going to do wonders for your team every time he gets any sort of attacking return. And if you back him to outperform the likes of Anthony Gordon or Pedro Neto, which I don't think is completely crazy, I don't think it's impossible to think that over the next set of 5 fixtures, he couldn't outperform those players, then you might have yourself a differential that's outperforming the likes of the template picks and really start helping you rise up the ranks. So there you have it, 4 differentials to be having a quick look at ahead of game week 9. Please let me know in the comments what you think of the video and what you think of those 4 differentials. Also, it would be really appreciated if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. But in the meantime, I hope you all have enjoyed the international break, and I'll see you ahead of my team selection video on Thursday for game week 9.